serious, it's fun, it's your Catholic Drive Time.
With Joe McLean and Emily Alcaraz.
Joining us right now from the Daily Wire, Michael Knowles. Good morning to you, Michael.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Christ is risen. Praise be to God. It's good to have you on. Now, I have to say, recently it seems to me anyway, that you have been speaking more and more about your faith on your program. I know you always have, but it seems like it's taken an uptick. Is that the case? And what might be motivating that?
Well, Holy Week and Easter, I suppose, is as good a time as any to be more explicit about one's faith. But I think you probably are right, which is that right now, this actually ties in well with the woke corporations question. Right now, we are undergoing a massive cultural revolution, and you're seeing this led not just by some government officials or by some bureaucrats, but you're seeing it in the universities, you're seeing it in big technology, you're seeing it in corporate America, you're seeing it all over the place. And for the past, 20 or so years, maybe going back even a little bit further, the answer from conservatives who opposed this kind of cultural revolution was to make sort of abstract arguments about procedure. So they would say, well, listen, we're not going to argue for a certain moral standard or a vision of politics or morality, but, we're just going to say that you have no right to infringe on my right to this abstract notion of free speech or something like that. And that strategy has failed. The cultural revolutionaries have been extraordinarily successful. And I think that what is incumbent upon us now, for anybody who would hope to conserve anything of our culture, is to articulate a substantive political vision, a moral vision. And it is simply impossible to do that without recourse to one's faith. Cardinal Manning famously said that all human conflict ultimately is theological, or in more recent days, you've had Andrew Breitbart, who is sometimes called the patron saint of Hollywood conservatives. He very famously said that politics is downstream of culture, and culture, of course, is downstream of religion. Cult and culture come from the same root word. And so really, I know that it's become fashionable, even on the right, to say things like, well, you can't legislate morality or something like that. But of course, you necessarily legislate morality. All laws refer in some way to the moral order. Our country has always understood that the natural law has something to do with our laws, and ultimately we're making moral arguments. So I think it's important, I don't think I'm the only one who's going to be discussing his faith more, particularly now as we see the Biden administration clamping down on religious practice. You see the corrosion, the erosion of religion to say freedom to worship or something like that. Churches closed. No longer is religion a public matter. We're only supposed to indulge in our religious views in the recesses of our mind. Well, sorry, folks, that's not how it works. And so I think you're going to see a lot more people speaking out.
Michael, your forthcoming book, Speechless, Controlling Words, Controlling Minds, I find it incredibly fascinating because I've been talking a lot recently about the whole idea of the importance of definitions and distinctions, and how the left or the woke culture tries to destroy definitions and distinctions. And I am a Thomist at heart, studied philosophy at the University of St. Thomas, and I love definitions and distinctions. That's 99% of philosophy. And the left tries to destroy that. Do you see, how is your book going to address this topic?
Well, certainly it is the case that the left attempts to redefine reality by redefining words. They think that if they can change the words that we use, that they can change the thoughts that we think and the way that we behave. And to some degree, this is true. They've had quite a lot of success at it. Obviously, reality reasserts itself in the end, but this is a fraught process. And we've called this process for the last 20, 30 years, we've called it political correctness. In my book, I trace it back a little bit further. I think that what we call political correctness or wokeness, or use whatever term you want, goes back about 100 years. Goes back to men like Antonio Gramsci, the Italian communist leader and Marxist theorist, who understood that the reason Marxian revolutions failed is because conservatives had the common sense The radicals pretended to speak for the oppressed people, but it turned out the oppressed people didn't like their theories very much. So Gramsci called for what would be called a war of position, attaining positions of influence within society to attain cultural revolution, cultural hegemony. And these theories were developed more by the Frankfurt School and what's called critical theory. For those who are confused about what critical theory is, it's pretty simple. The theory is to criticize. Critical race theory has been in the news a lot these days. Some of those theorists from the Frankfurt School reemerged in the 1960s with the birth of the New Left. Herbert Marcuse, in particular, became known as the father of the New Left. And I think that basically conservatives have not taken these intellectuals seriously enough. We joke about PC and we say, oh, these snowflakes, they're behaving so crazily. But really, these were very sophisticated political thinkers, and they've been extraordinarily successful. I think the reason for this is that political correctness lays a trap for conservatives. And the trap is this. The point of political correctness is to destroy the traditional standards. That is its sole purpose. Going back to critical theory, or going back to a line from Karl Marx, who said that he wanted to undertake, quote, the ruthless criticism of all that exists. So, political correctness succeeds by one of two ways. Either when people acquiesce to the new standards, as a lot of squishy conservatives do, or when people eschew standards altogether. So you'll very often hear self-described conservatives say, well, look, I'm not going along with that PC stuff. I just think you should be able to say whatever you want and do whatever you want. But the irony here is that either reaction will permit political correctness to succeed, because the whole point of it is just to destroy the old order. So I think we need a third way. I think it's not just that we go along with the PC woke left, and it's not just that we throw our hands up in the air and say, do whatever you want. We have to articulate a substantive moral vision. We have to acknowledge the reality of moral conscience as a judgment of reason. That's going to be the only way we're going to win.
All right, hold that thought. Praise be to God. Michael Knowles is our guest from the Daily Wire. We're talking about the woke culture. Emily, did you see that story about Justice Clarence Thomas sort of hinting at the possibility of putting the hammer on the technocrats and their locking us down on our free speech,
of censoring social media? Yeah, I saw that, and it's really interesting. And Michael, I think this is something that you address very well, which is the limits of free speech, because we know that not all ideas should have equal rights. At least this is something that we understand in the Catholic faith. And this is something that you addressed when talking about the introduction of different ideologies on college campuses. Michael, could you explain your opinion on this?
I can, but I have to warn you. You sound like an illiberal, authoritarian. These are all the words that I
Preach
like
it, brother.
well.
Preach it.
But you know what's so funny about this is that even though now it's become so fashionable for conservatives to say that we are free speech absolutists or some word like that, this was not always the case. William F. Buckley Jr., as mainstream a conservative as ever there was, founded the post-war conservative movement, fellow Catholic, by the way. He pointed out, he wrote a book defending Joe McCarthy and McCarthyism, and then he pointed out even more than a decade later that he's a quote, epistemological optimist, by which he meant he felt that certain ideas were settled. He wrote in God and Man at Yale that academic freedom is a hoax, it's a farce, it's a superstition that is simply a political tool by radicals trying to upend the culture. Now, unfortunately, some confused intellectual heirs of people like Bill Buckley want to embrace these kinds of terms. But we live in a finite world. Politics is necessarily limited. And when we embrace so-called free speech absolutism, we embrace the same error of the leftists. We embrace a hyper-radical individualism that has no relation to real society. You know, from the very beginning of our country, there were whole swaths of speech that have not been permitted. Fraud, sedition, obscenity. We were throwing pornographers in jail for obscenity in this country about 13 years ago, at the end of the George W. Bush administration. We've had these prohibitions for a very long time, many others as well. What has changed is not that now we are censoring speech. This battle that we think we're fighting between free speech and censorship doesn't exist. What we're really fighting is a battle between two competing sets of standards, and even more specifically, the old conservative standards based on Christianity and a new anti-standard of wokeness. And I think we need to wake up to that fact. I think a lot of cowardly conservatives don't want to undertake the arduous task of articulating a real vision for society. But if we don't do that, then we are really just fiddling while the Titanic is going down. We're not going to put up any resistance. It's why, for decades, as conservatives have thought that we were fighting hard against political correctness, we have only continued to cede ground.
Oh, Michael, you brought up the point of in regards to the not ceding ground. Now, it feels like we're always on defense. We're always trying to conserve. I guess that's why a lot of people consider themselves conservatives. But how do we move forward? How do we gain ground in the culture and the religion, bring back the faith in America, specifically the Catholic faith in America, in regards to the culture today? What's the process of moving forward, of going on offense?
I'll try to answer that in the negative by showing you what not to do. There was a rather well-known writer at a very well-known conservative publication who is an evangelical Christian, and he famously said that drag queen story hours are one of the blessings of liberty. He was debating a Catholic, yes. And, I think the founding fathers are rolling over in their graves at that thought. The argument that they would make, that these sort of proceduralists would make, who don't want to make a substantive vision, or make a substantive argument, rather, is they would say, look, if we tell radicals that they can't twerk for toddlers at drag queen story hour at public libraries, they might tell us that we can't go to Mass on Sunday. And my answer to them is, first of all, they're already telling us we can't go to Mass. I don't know where you were in 2020, but a lot of people were telling us we can't go to Mass. But also, if we do not possess the ability to distinguish good from bad and right from wrong and true from false, if we can't distinguish between drag queen story hour and church on Sunday, then we do not possess the capacity for self-government, because self-government, it relies on our rational faculties and our ability to make moral judgments. Whenever you even suggest that these days to conservatives, they will shudder, because a really degraded kind of pseudo-libertarianism has taken over the right. But we've got to dump that sort of stuff. I think of John Locke in his letter concerning toleration. This is the father of liberalism. He famously said we need to tolerate all sorts of ideas, but we're not going to tolerate atheism, and atheists should not be given the same toleration that everyone else is. Even John Locke, even the guy who invented this philosophy, who discovered this sort of stuff, recognized there were limits. And I just think that conservatives need to get on board and not be so afraid of being called an authoritarian or an illiberal. If the points that we are making are illiberal, then John Locke was downright fascist. Okay, we need to stop worrying about what the left will call us, and we need to say that some things are good and some things are bad.
Michael Knowles is our guest. He is with the Daily Wire. We're talking about the insanity of our culture and what we could do about it. Recently, Michael, one of my kids asked me, Dad, which would be worse, an atheist president, a Muslim president? And I said, you know what would be worse? Would be a president who is Catholic in name only, but rejects the church's teaching completely.
Yep.
Especially on the non-negotiable issues. I see so much in our church today, Michael, that as sort of to the point Adrian was making earlier, it's like we just go along to get along. We don't want to rock the boat. But this seems to be like the time. If we don't stand now, will there be a time to stand in the future? What say you, Michael Knowles?
Well, of course, our second Catholic president that we've elected is very well known for suing nuns for refusing to pay for abortions and contraception. So he's got a very tenuous grasp and relationship to the Catholic Church. I agree with your point. I think there's a lot of wisdom to that. Because if you were to have an atheist president or a Muslim president or some other kind of president who doesn't share our views, at least there would be honesty there. At least there would be clarity. What you see now on the left, empowered by Joe Biden, are groups like, quote, Catholics for Choice, This is a group that is in part led by a man who thinks that he's a woman. There were many, many problems with this organization. But of course, it's a contradiction in terms. You cannot be a Catholic for abortion. It's nonsense. And the left has always been very good at this. They have their radicals out there who are writing their philosophical tracts, but they're very subtle in the way that they infiltrate society. So they will, and you've seen this happen in the church as well. Archbishop Vigano wrote about this well in his letters a couple of years ago, that there is this campaign on to subtly infiltrate the positions of power. It's actually what Antonio Gramsci described 100 years ago. And I think that conservatives need to get a bit cleverer about this as well. I don't think that we should lie. I don't think we should do anything immoral. But we ought to be able to have a campaign to attain positions of power. And more importantly, this is something conservatives have not wanted to do for 20 years. We need to wield the political power that the people give us when we have the opportunity to do so. And there's been a great reluctance because that involves moral risk and courage. I was thinking that someday, I hope President Trump lives a long time, but when he goes to his eternal reward, I hope he donates his body to science and his spine to the GOP. if we could get just a little bit of courage, I think we could do a whole lot.
I think you just broke the internet with that one.
That was good.
We have about 3.5 minutes left with Michael Knowles from the Daily Wire. Did you happen to see, Michael, this tweet that was sent out by Warnock and then since deleted? It said this: the meaning of Easter is more transcendent than the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Whether you are Christian or not, through a commitment to helping others, we are able to save ourselves. What would you say to that, Michael Knowles?
Well, there is nothing new under the sun, including Raphael Warnock's tweet, which is merely warmed over Pelagianism. Pelagianism is a 5th century heresy. It was condemned at the Council of Carthage. Sometimes some Protestant denominations accuse Catholics of being Pelagian, meaning we advocate salvation by works. But this is not true. The Church condemned that heresy many, many moons ago. And it is quite clear to me that Raphael Warnock is not a Christian. I don't mean this in a finger-wagging way or as some sort of, emotional insult. I'm just stating the fact. He does not support the central tenets of Christianity. This has been true of even less odious figures than Raphael Warnock. Famously, Martin Luther King Jr. Rejected the Trinity. He rejected the divinity of Christ. He rejected the literal resurrection. So, I'm not saying you can't accomplish some good things and have admirable qualities, but you can't really call yourself a Christian. And that's the problem for Raphael Warnock. So I would recommend people not call him pastor and not refer to him as the leader of a Christian church. It gets back to the same issue we were just talking about, which is this subtle redefinition, manipulation of words, the idea that you can believe that the resurrection is unnecessary and not even the best part of Easter and still call yourself a Christian. That is not true. And if we're not willing to distinguish between one concept and another, between good and bad, and right and wrong and true and false, then we're not going to have self-government into the future.
Absolutely. And Michael, we have about a minute left here with you. We here at the CDT team are fans of the Latin Mass. Is it true that you also attend the Latin Mass?
I do. I love the Latin Mass.
So do we. That's great. Thank you so much for being on with us today, Michael Knowles.
All right. Praise be to God.
So good to be with you.
Michael Knowles, Daily Wire. God love you. God bless you. Have a great day and happy Easter.
You too. Thank you so much.
All right, that is going to do it for the first hour of Catholic Drive Time. Praise be to God, but there is a ton of Catholic Drive Time to come in the next hour. If you're at all able to join us, we would love to have you. If you need to be on a social stream, you can find the links on our website, grnonline.com/CDT, grnonline.com/CDT. The game show is coming up. Prizes are involved. New sponsor this week. We're very excited, and you can be in on that, plus the after show and a ton more. God love you. God bless you. If you can't be on, we'll see you back here, 6 a.m. Central, 7 Eastern, tomorrow morning for Catholic Drive Time. God bless.
Thank you for joining us on Your Catholic Drive Time, where it is our pleasure to keep you informed and inspired.
Join us Monday through Friday at the same time, right here on your favorite Catholic radio station.
Don't forget to connect with us. Just go to facebook.com/Catholic Drive Time.
Again, that's facebook.com/Catholic Drive Time.
Be sure to share more than just us today. Share Jesus with everyone you meet.
Bye now, and God love you.